Assalamu alaikum. This is going to be the first video of the Islamic Prophecy series from the Shahada Mission Library server, and the first video is going to be on the prophecy by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where he prophesies the conquest of Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. Now, before actually going into the prophecy, I would like to note that this series is not going to be in chronological order like the Biblical Prophecy series. Rather, it's going to be randomized because of how much prophecies there needs to be covered, and it's a lot more difficult to arrange them in chronological order. Now, this is the actual prophecy straight off the bat, where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, during the Battle of the Trench, struck Iraq, saying, Allah is the most great, I have been given the keys of Asham, greater Syria. Allah is the most great, I have been given Persia. And the third time, he struck the boulder, saying, Allah is the most great, I have been given the keys of Yemen. Now, it's important to note that the keys of Asham and Persia and Yemen being given to the Prophet himself is not literal. It means that the Muslims, they will gain these places. So if the Muslims gain these places, that's just a metaphorical way of the Prophet saying that the keys of these places are given to him. And to support this is the next slide, where there's a hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari reported that Yemen will be conquered. The Prophet Muhammad said, Sham will also be conquered, which is the greater Syria, and Iraq will also be conquered. Here's another hadith where it even gives a chronological order, where Yemen will be conquered, then Syria will be conquered, then, with a spelling error, Iraq will be conquered. Now, what's very interesting about this prophecy to note is that it's a very risky thing for the Prophet himself to be claiming that Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, which were under the control of the Persians and the Romans, two of the biggest superpowers at that time, to be conquered and be fallen into the hands of the Muslims. But what makes this even riskier is when you know the actual context of when this prophecy was being made and the situation the Muslims were in when the prophecy was foretold. So this prophecy was made during the Battle of the Trench, or the Battle of the Ditch, some would call it, which happened in March of 627 CE, where the Meccans under Abu Sufyan brought an army of 10,000 men against 3,000 men, or the 3,000 Muslims in Medina. Now, this makes the prophecy even more risky. We have to understand that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is making the claim that Yemen, Syria, and Iraq, which were the territories under the Byzantine and the Persian empires, two of the biggest superpowers at that time, will fall to the hands of the Muslims in a war while being outnumbered by more than 3 times. The more likelihood outcome is that the Muslims will get crushed because they were outnumbered, out-technology, by the pagans under Abu Sufyan. So what you would expect is the Muslims to get crushed, which means they would not have any opportunity to even fight the Byzantines and the Persians. Rather, the prophecy goes against all the odds. Now, a false prophet would never make such claims, putting himself in such a risky position and making claims that goes against all the chances, with the likelihood that it's probably going to fail, risking his entire prophetic career. Now, the Muslims were actually mocked because of this prophecy. Here's one narration on the left, where the disbelievers, they came and in a mocking way, they said, "Here are the sovereigns of earth who will defeat Khosrows and Caesar." But the believers, they knew that Allah's promise is true, and they were perseverant through the persecution and humiliation. Here's another narration where the hypocrites in the trenches, they came and they taunted them for having quote-unquote false hopes of defeating Kisra, which was the emperor of the Persian Empire, and Caesar, who was the emperor of the Roman Empire. After the conquest of Mecca in 630 CE, Yemen was also conquered, while the Arabs were unified under one banner, under Islam, fulfilling the first part of the prophecy. In 636 CE, August, the Battle of Yarmouk happened under Khalid ibn Walid, which is known to be his greatest victory, and it ended with the parts of Syria being conquered and fallen into the hands of the Muslims, fulfilling the second part of the prophecy, which is that the Muslims would conquer Asham. By 638 CE, the Muslims conquered almost all of Iraq under Umar bin Khattab, fulfilling the third part of the prophecy, where the Muslims would conquer Iraq, fulfilling all of the prophecy, as the Muslims now had a hold of all these places, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, as you can see on the map, all under the control of the Muslims, fulfilling the entire prophecy. If there's still people out there claiming that this prophecy was somehow, some way predictable. Here's a source, a quote from an academic, from a historian named Andrew Louth, who says, and the source is down here, The Cambridge History of the Byzantine Empire by Jonathan Shepherd, page 230, where he says the speed with which the eastern provinces of the Byzantine Empire succumbed to the Arabs remains to be explained by historians. There's another Western historian by the name of Barnaby Rogerson who put this whole war in a context of a modern lens.
You have to remember that the two great superpowers of the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Persia had bestrode the world for the last 400 years. They were the dominant powers. I mean, if you're putting it in a modern parlance, it's a bit like the Eskimos taking on the United States of America and Russia.